In this video, I'm going to do something slightly different. I'm going to compare the free mini Ticket to Ride box sets that you can buy these days. We first had New York, now we've got London, and now Amsterdam. Which one is best? What are the key differences? Well, that's what you're here to find out. Hi, I'm Luke Hector from the Broken Meeple, and if you're new to this channel and you want to find out about board games and the people who play them, then click the subscribe button and ring the bell for future notifications. Any videos or websites that I talk about in this video will of course be presented as links in the description below. Ticket to Ride has been one of those evergreen titles that is like the quintessential gateway game that you should use to bring new players into the hobby. What is all this Gloomhaven stuff at #1 on BGG? I've always advocated that Ticket to Ride should be the #1 game on BGG because let's face it, who in the board gaming hobby has never heard of Ticket to Ride? Who has not used Ticket to Ride to bring a completely new player into the hobby? How many times do you see this being sold and played and taught? And this is a game that has been sold since 2004, a decade and a half ago. This is the game that deserves to be ranked #1, not some £150 monster thing that most people don't even know how to get or play. And as you can see from the decor in my studio, can I call it that? This Ticket to Ride franchise has gone on for a long time and spawned a lot of expansions, and this is just 5 of them on the wall, 5 of the map packs you can get. There are other ones and they're all contained in my lovely jumbo box there. Check out my shelf by shelf video if you want to know more about this crate in general. I believe it's number 49 in the series. So now Days of Wonder have gone the extra mile, or shortened the mile I guess, depending on your perspective, and brought out these small box expansions. First there was New York, and now we've got London and Amsterdam. So these are essentially meant to be 15-minute filler versions of the big set of Ticket to Ride. But what's the point of them? Is there a point? And which one is best? Well, that's what I'm here to tell you. If you have never heard of Ticket to Ride before, and if so, you must be fairly new to the hobby, in which case, welcome, one and all, then Ticket to Ride is just a classic gateway game. You collect sets of coloured cards in order to play train routes on a map, connect up locations and score points by completing tickets. And you score points for bigger routes that you can collect, you can block off other players, there are all sorts of different maps, each with their own nuances and layouts and occasional extra mechanics. It is just such a great game. You could pick up any of these Ticket to Ride sets and have a blast, and if you go to your local board game cafe, I guarantee that if the cafe is even worth mentioning at all, it has a copy of Ticket to Ride somewhere in there for you to play. So what do these new sets provide? Well, if you're used to Ticket to Ride, then it brings pretty much the same rule set across. You collect sets of coloured cards, you play them in order to put your vehicles, in this case because it's no longer trains, on the board and connect up cities for points, and each one has a slight nuance to the scoring over the other. Aside from that, they are pretty much identical games. But there are occasional differences with regards to the aesthetics, and the little nuance of extra scoring can make the difference as to which one you prefer, not to mention the map layout is different among them as well. So let's talk aesthetics first, the first of the 2 main differences here. With this, the board for New York is fairly light coloured, but it's easy to see the routes on there. It's been darkened up slightly. It is definitely a taller and thinner map, which makes it look different from the other 2, because the other 2 are more kind of rectangular fat maps, if that makes sense. And use the taxis, they are basically very basic plastic sculpts of taxis. The artwork on the cards is vibrant and colourful, and it does the job very nicely for a cheap £15 or less package. With London, you get a little bit more of an inspirational feel with regards to the scoring track and some of the decor around the board. You're now using buses instead of taxis. The one problem that this one has compared to the other 2 though, is that the board is very light coloured. In fact, a little bit too light coloured. If you look at the background of the board compared with the tracks on the board, they do blend in a little bit more. It's not like one is darker than the other in order to bring out that more contrast. With this one, London is probably the hardest to visualise on the table, but that is still a minor nitpick because frankly this table presence is so small, you're going to be sat round it pretty close anyway and you should be able to see what's going on. But from a distance, you can argue that it's a little bit harder to see the London board compared to the other 2. Amsterdam though does not have this problem. This is easily the best looking of the free sets that you can get. It has the nicest looking board with a map of historical Amsterdam in the background, but with perfectly contrasted routes on the board as well. It is easy to see where the routes go, which ones have cart symbols. It's just so easy on the eye so that people, even of like bad sight, should be able to make out what is going on. And the point track is clear. The cards themselves are really vibrant colors. I love the use of different modes of transportation for the different cards. Like one of them is a mule, the other one is a little sailing boat, and everything just really pops on the table. Easily the best for aesthetics out of the free. But despite looking the best of the free out of these sets, there is one issue I have with the aesthetics of Amsterdam, and that is the wagons themselves. It uses mule wagons instead of trains for the placement on the board, but these wagons are smaller and more spindly and fiddly than the buses and trains and taxis we've had in the past, and they're smaller than the route networks themselves, whereas previously the train used to cover up the entire segment. It just kind of looks a bit weird on the table, and from a distance it's sometimes a bit hard to tell who's covered what particular route. So whereas London has the issue with the board part, I think Amsterdam has a slight issue with the wagon pieces. So now looking at the other difference between them, the nuance with scoring. What little quirk does it throw in order to differentiate itself? Well, New York is the weakest of the three in my opinion. Here, all you have is a few locations on the board with a 1 next to it, and if you connect those up, you get that additional point on top of claiming the route and getting the tickets. It's about as boring an extra scoring mechanism as you can get. It literally is just a case of play the game as you were, and if you happen to be going across those routes, hopefully your ticket wants you to, you'll get some extra points. And it's not even a great deal of extra points. I mean, we're talking 1 point for each of these locations, and other people can get them as well, so they don't have that big of an impact. Really, you might as well call New York Ticket to Ride USA for the small box sets. That little bit of extra scoring is negligible, it's not even worth mentioning, and it just basically makes New York the bare bones version of these three. London has a similar mechanism with routes on the board giving you extra points, but the difference here is that rather than just connecting from A to B, there are districts, and you have to connect all the tracks in a district, like in a big ring, in order to collect the points from worth 1 to 5. Obviously it is a lot harder to do the 5-point district than it is to do the 1-point district. This is my favourite of the three new scoring mechanisms, because as well as making a fair difference to the score at the end of the game, having those districts, because chances are, if you've been spending a lot of time getting the big districts, you probably haven't got as many tickets, or you just haven't claimed as many routes in general. But people fight for those routes, and it gets quite clogged up nice and easily, and it's just a nice little incentive. I mean, you can make it your focus of the game. Rather than go for so many tickets, you might decide, right, well, I'm not going to go for many tickets, I'll go for the districts. So you have at least 2 decent, distinct paths to victory for a 15-minute filler. Amsterdam's one is a little unappealing as well. You might as well call it share certificates. They call it merchandise cards, but what is the difference really? Here, every time you connect a route with cart symbols on it, you draw a merchandise card, and at the end of the game, whoever has the most gets a certain amount of points, second most next, third most. It's basically a majority holding. It could be merchandise, share certificates, whatever, it could be anything and it will work. It's not a bad mechanic though in practice, because you do have that distinction of, do I go for tickets or do I try and get those cards? Maybe they work in conjunction, you don't know. And depending on what positions everybody is on the score track, the differential in points can make a decent amount of difference. Granted that the top 2 players are fighting for the victory and they're both first and second on those card symbols, then 3 points isn't going to make a difference half the time. But that differential between first place and last place on the merchandise cards could swing the game for somebody. So I certainly prefer this much more to New York, but I think London takes the edge on it slightly. So how do I rank these three personally? Well, in third place, easily New York. It looks fine on the board and it does the job, but I just don't think the penny location is particularly interesting. Really, the only thing that saves New York is the fact that the map being slightly long and squished is a slightly different feel from the other two. But comparing it to all three, this is the weakest of them, and it's why it's not in my collection. But I would still give it a 7 out of 10 and say it's a perfectly decent game. Second place and third place are a little bit closer to call, but I would give Amsterdam the second place spot. It certainly looks the best from a board perspective, but those wagon spindly pieces are a little bit of an off-put for me. And also the merchandise cards are nice and all, but again, I don't feel that they create too much of an interesting dynamic during the game compared to the London one in a minute. But I still think this is a solid one. I would play this one over New York, and this one will still remain in my collection, and I would give it a decent 8 out of 10. But my number one spot has to go to the London map. And no, this is not because I'm from Britain. I would much rather visit New York than Amsterdam than London any day. But London, with that district scoring, I think just creates that streamlined yet interesting feel for a Ticket to Ride game. Granted, the Amsterdam one is probably better from an aesthetics perspective, but this one I think just takes the slight nudge from a gameplay perspective. But that being said, it was a close call. Amsterdam and London, I could take it or leave it, but I think London just gets that little bit of an edge from me, with New York clearly being the underdog in this particular list. But at the end of the day, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 8 out of 10, you could pick any of these maps and still do fine. They do a great job of bringing Ticket to Ride down to a filler game level, and I still maintain everybody should have a copy of Ticket to Ride in their collection. Even if it's just one map, you need a copy. I still think it should be the number one on Board Game Geek. Do I give it a 10 out of 10? No, but that's not the point. It's not a case of whether I give it a 10, it's a case of whether I think the game is deserving of such a rank, and it is. Every cafe has one. Every time I teach it to people, it goes over well. I have friends who love it. My dad loves it. It's his favourite game from the modern era that I have brought home to show. Every time I come home, he's always like, oh, can we play Ticket to Ride India? Please, please, please. He just wants to get it out. And every time I bring a new map home, it's like, hey dad, look, I've got a new map for you. And he just wants to play it. That brings me so much joy to see. And to be fair, I've not even shown him these little ones actually. So I'm going up to visit the folks in about a week's time of recording this video, so you know what? I'm going to take Amsterdam and London with me and see what he says. But yeah, honestly, pick your poison. All I've done is compared and contrasted the three, told you my opinions. It's up to you to make the final decision. Now, I hope you've been enjoying the video content I've been bringing out, but I'm not the only content creator out there that deserves your support. So therefore, why didn't you check these two out and see what you think?
Hey guys, what's up? I'm Jody.
And I'm Justin.
And we are Board Game Perspective.
So our passions are board games and photography, and we want to show off the awesome world of board games through high quality how to play videos, cinematic sequences, and photography, etc.
So our channel is in honor of my brother. He's actually the one that got us into loving board games. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but he wanted to leave us his entire board game collection, which consisted of over 200 board games, some of them of which are even behind us now.
So if you guys are interested in following our channel, go ahead and search Board Game Perspective in YouTube, or you can find us at Board Game Perspective on Instagram if you want to follow some of our board game photography.
So thanks for watching today. We'll see y'all later. And thanks Luke for the shout out.
So that's it from me on this video. If you liked what you see, send a like, click the button in the center to subscribe, and ring the bell for future notifications. If you want to check out additional content, there's always my board game glossary or my recent podcast showing. Take care, and remember, it's only a game.